On this Friday night, Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz for now. How the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire has opened the vital oil supply route. Why a U.S. blockade is complicating the arrangement as the war takes a devastating toll on civilians.
All those who were martyred were doctors, engineers, intellectuals, and educated people.
Doug Ford's sky-high controversy, the taxpayer funds used to buy the Ontario Premier's multi-million-dollar jet. The bipartisan push in Parliament to bolster Canada's Arctic security. And AI resurrects late Hollywood star Val Kilmer for one more role.
Don't fear the dead, and don't fear me.
The technology prompting industry backlash.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump says his blockade of Iranian ports is firmly in place, despite Iran claiming today it fully reopened the key Strait of Hormuz to commercial vessels. Iran had indicated its change in policy is linked to the U.S. brokered ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. But Trump says it's not and that he wants a full peace deal. Today's reopening, which may only be temporary, is the clearest sign yet of optimism that oil may resume flowing through the critical shipping route. Oil prices plunged today and financial markets soared. We'll have more on that in a moment. But we begin tonight with Remond Shannon with the latest developments.
Iran's announcement that the Strait of Hormuz is fully open is a huge relief to major shipping companies and to countless people and businesses around the world that rely on the energy and goods from the Persian Gulf. But Iran is still insisting ships follow a designated route by its coast. How that now works remains unclear. What's more, US President Donald Trump said the US naval blockade on Iranian ports will remain in full force and effect until there is a full peace deal with Iran. As part of a flurry of social media posts Friday, Trump said he received a call from NATO asking if we would need some help. I told them to stay away. They were useless when needed. Those allies and others joined a virtual summit in Paris to plan for protecting shipping in the Strait, if Trump allows them.
The mission that we're putting together is a defensive mission and that comes after a ceasefire.
Prime Minister Mark Carney, who joined the summit, says Canada will help with diplomacy and crew security, likely less hands-on than European nations. Iran says the strait's reopening will last as long as the new ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. Hours after it came into effect, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said disarming Hezbollah will take time. He outlined a buffer zone inside Lebanon that Israel will continue to occupy as the two nations prepare for historic talks. Like Netanyahu, Lebanon's president is facing criticism for dealing directly with their neighbour. Joseph Aoun tried to reassure Lebanese people that the talks are not a concession, suggesting that Lebanon is no longer influenced by Iran in how it decides its future. Trump says talks about both ceasefires are ongoing, but tonight a senior Iranian official appeared to contradict the US president's claim that the US would get to keep all of Iran's enriched uranium. Colleen?
Remond Shannon in London. Thanks, Remond. Oil prices fell sharply today on hopes tankers holding millions of barrels of oil and gas could reach the world market. Brent crude, the global benchmark, fell 13% to $86.30 a barrel. Oil prices were trading at their lowest levels since the first week of March. And global markets already trading near record highs soared even further today. The TSX was up more than 0.5% on the day, reversing losses from the start of the war. And the S&P 500 jumped 1.2% as Wall Street finished a third straight week of gains. U.S. stocks have rallied more than 12% since late March on hopes of an end to the war in Iran. The ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon has sparked cautious optimism for permanent peace among some Lebanese. Others say talks to end the fighting have come too late and at an unspeakable cost. Candice Cole is in Washington with a closer look at the toll the attacks have had on civilians and their hopes for the future.
This has been a 45-day nightmare for children and families in Lebanon. Nowhere in Lebanon has been safe.
After nearly 2 months of heavy fighting between Israel and Hezbollah, an Iran-backed militant group, Lebanese civilians are beginning to make the journey back home with hesitant hopes for lasting peace. Like this man just returning to his home in southern Lebanon, saying, God willing, the truce will last forever, hoping this will be his last displacement.
This temporary pause does bring a sense of relief to families, but true relief will come once this pause turns into a ceasefire that is definitive and permanent, and that's what people want in Lebanon.
But for some, the news of the ceasefire at this point is too little too late. Like for Hassan Mohammed Abu Khalil, who'd gone out for coffee with friends only to return home finding all 13 members of his family had been killed by Israeli airstrikes just minutes before the ceasefire was announced. Since the U.S. and Israel war on Iran began last month, nearly 2,300 people have been killed in Lebanon, according to the country's health ministry. The conflict has hit Lebanese children especially hard, with nonprofit Save the Children estimating some 20 children a day are killed or injured due to the strikes, increasing the need for aid.
So the injuries amongst civilians, particularly children, is something that has been very acute, and that requires a surge in humanitarian assistance, ensuring that children have access to medical care.
Now, Lebanon's president says his country is working toward permanent agreements with Israel to preserve the rights of Lebanese people and their sovereignty. Candice Cole, Global News, Washington.
The doubling of jet fuel prices has prompted Air Canada to suspend flights to New York's JFK Airport. From June through late October, flights from Montreal and Toronto will cease. The airline says some routes are no longer economically viable amid the oil blockade. Air Canada will continue to fly to LaGuardia and Newark. Special weather statements have been issued for southern Ontario and Quebec, with more heavy rain expected this weekend. Several rivers are already breaching their banks, and Montreal has raised its flood alert to the highest level.
We've been deploying protective measures since the beginning of this week, and we will continue to do so based on the plans that have been established based on our experience from 2017.
Forecasters don't expect the flooding in Montreal to be as bad as in 2017 or 2019, but another 25 millimeters of rain could fall this weekend. In addition to sandbags, the city has been installing cutting-edge modular plastic barriers to help contain the water.
We certainly are seeing high flows and rising water levels throughout the watershed.
Officials in Ontario are keeping an eye on creeks and rivers, with sandbagging taking place in several locations. Cottage country north of Toronto could see up to 30 millimeters of rain this weekend after receiving double that this week. Some 12 million low to modest income Canadians will receive some help with their grocery bills on June 5th. Mark Carney says a family of 4 will receive up to $1,890 this year and about $1,400 a year for the next 4 years. Carney announced the Canada Groceries and Essentials benefit in January, saying it's an increase of 25% over the current GST credit. Canada Post has announced the communities that will transition to centralized mailboxes this year. 13 communities across the country will no longer receive door-to-door delivery, affecting 136,000 addresses. As Andrea McPherson reports, the move is just the first step in a 5-year plan to phase out home mail delivery.
Not everyone is giving a stamp of approval to news that about 4 million addresses are expected to be converted into community mailboxes over the next 5 years.
Well, I don't think it's safe, really. You've heard a lot of break-ins that they've had in some of the mailboxes.
I like it in my mailbox, 20 feet away from me.
I suppose if they're trying to reduce their cost on everything, maybe it's a good deal, but I don't know. kind of like it coming to the house.
We really looked for areas that are adjacent, usually to those areas that already have community mailboxes, or areas that are not as challenging of, say, like some of those dense urban centers.
The Crown Corporation says there will be a lot of communication in the mail as the transition gets underway.
We have an accommodations program that's been in place for 10 years, that anyone, senior people with mobility issues, we have a variety of services and changes that we can implement to help and support them. We don't want anyone left behind.
The first conversions will begin in late 2026 and early 2027, and not everyone is pushing back against the idea.
So much junk comes through the mailbox anyway that I wouldn't mind kissing that goodbye, to be honest.
If that's what it takes, that's what it takes, because I think we should keep Canada Post.
Canada Post says nearly 3 out of 4 Canadian residents already receive mail through some form of centralized delivery. Andrea McPherson, Global News.
Advocates for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls are calling out the Manitoba government and child welfare agencies. They say too many children are living in dangerous situations. Despite millions of dollars in funding, many children are still falling through the cracks. Melissa Ridgen is in Winnipeg, where people are protesting for better care. Melissa.
Calling amidst rally on a chilly Winnipeg wintry day. Here is a call to action. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and children's advocates sounding the alarm that it's just a matter of time before Manitoba sees another tragedy like Tina Fontaine.
Barb Guimond is a community patrol volunteer who sees kids in care too often at risk on the streets.
We're trying to prevent that from happening again. There's a lot of factors in play, and this is overall, I'm worried about all kids.
Fontaine was a frequent runaway who was exploited and at 15 found wrapped in a duvet dumped in the Red River. Her 2014 death ignited the MMIW movement and led to an inquiry and 231 calls for justice. But those doing street outreach say they still see kids like Tina Fontaine falling through the cracks.
Are those same systemic failings still happening?
Yes, I believe so. Totally.
The federal government is spending $35.5 billion over 8 years to reform the First Nations Child and Family Services program. Manitoba is spending $420 million this year on 9,000 kids in care.
First Nations people are a big money-making commodity.
Manitoba Families Minister Nahani Fontaine declined our request for an interview, but her staff say she's aware of this protest and they're working with authorities to keep the province's most at-risk kids safe and protected to avoid yet another national tragedy here. Colleen.
Melissa Ridgen in Winnipeg. Thanks, Melissa. Ontario is buying a private jet for the Premier's use. Coming up, how the government is justifying the nearly $3 million expenditure. And why MPs from all parties say CSIS urgently needs to establish a presence in the Canadian Arctic. The Ontario government has purchased a private jet to be used by Premier Doug Ford for travel within the province and to the United States. The 2016 Challenger jet cost $28.9 million. The Premier's office says it's needed amid the trade war with the U.S. As you can imagine, reaction from the opposition was swift. Colin DeMello reports.
When Premier Doug Ford first came to office, he promised to remain grounded.
I'm the only premier in history that refuses to use the Premier's plane, the King Air, that costs the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. I prefer to drive around.
But 7 years later, Ford is now about to take flight, buying a private jet costing taxpayers $30 million.
I think it's outrageous that the Premier would be considering spending $30 million on a luxury private plane. You know, he could maybe just take economy like the rest of us too, and actually understand how the rest of the world is getting by.
The Premier's office says it's a second-hand, Canadian-made Challenger 650, a 12-seater plane with the range to fly the Premier across the country to the United States and even to Europe. Bombardier has billed the jet as offering high-end comfort equipped with HD screens and wider seats, which is why it's already being dubbed the gravy plane.
When people can't afford to buy groceries or gas, Doug Ford is buying himself a private jet. It doesn't get much more out of touch than that.
The Ford government said the price tag is lower than what Quebec or the federal government has paid for its jets. But critics are now questioning whether the Premier's private plane is one of the driving factors behind the takeover of Toronto's Island Airport. Currently, only turboprop aircraft are allowed to land there, and Ford said an expansion is necessary.
We're going to make sure it's safe by extending the runways as well. But that's what we want to do, is focus on an economic driver for the city of Toronto.
While the expansion of the runway could take years, the Premier's plane is expected to take flight as soon as next week. At Queen's Park, Colin DeMello, Global News.
Protecting the Canadian Arctic, the urgent action MPs of all stripes are calling for on northern security. These 15 penguins look pretty happy to return to the sea today after months of rehabilitation in Argentina. The group includes 13 Magellantic penguins and 2 southern rockhopper penguins. They were all taken at different times over the last few months for various health issues or injuries. The penguins were released together because they are social animals that migrate in groups. Arctic sovereignty is a growing concern. Now members of the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee are pushing the federal government to improve it. In a report issued this week, in a rare show of unity, MPs said the geopolitical moment requires urgent action to expand and improve security in the far north. David Aiken reports.
Canadian military personnel loaded up supplies last month in the bone-chilling cold of Canada's high Arctic. This group was among 1,300 soldiers, sailors, and aviators participating in this first phase of the annual Operation Nanook, 3 months of high Arctic military exercises, which just concluded this week. The 2026 version of Operation Nanook was the biggest ever. But also this week, MPs from all parties say more, much more, must be done to project and sustain combat-capable forces across Canada's Arctic. In a rare show of unanimity across party lines, MPs on the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee warned that Canada must move beyond what it called, quote, piecemeal investments in order to secure Canada's northern frontier.
When Canada's sovereignty is under threat, it's important that we work together to protect our sovereignty.
The committee said Canada not only needs new military bases in the high Arctic, but it also said the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, CSIS, should establish a permanent presence there to counter cyber espionage and foreign interference, notably from China, aimed at Arctic targets. Prime Minister Mark Carney did announce last month that Ottawa is prepared to spend $35 billion on defense and infrastructure in the Arctic. The Foreign Affairs Committee welcomed that news, but said those spending plans must be insulated from any political shifts.
One of the things we would like to see from the government is greater clarity on exactly how the money is being spent and when it's being spent.
Arctic leaders told the committee they worry this geopolitical moment will fade, and interest and investment in Arctic sovereignty will fade with it.
You can't undo decades of underinvestment with a moment. You need to counter that with a sustained, well planned out plan to build up the north as it should be.
The government is expected to respond to this report in May. David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
Next, Hollywood's Lazarus Act, the new movie starring a deceased Val Kilmer and the controversy it's raising. This explosion heard across the Greater Toronto area last night was part of a controlled film shoot, according to authorities. Downsview Park residents raised concerns after they heard the loud boom. A public notice had been issued earlier this week warning that pyrotechnic special effects would be used in the area. There's been speculation the blast was part of a music video shoot for Toronto rapper Drake after he posted footage of the explosion to Instagram. Actor Val Kilmer died of cancer just over a year ago, but he's about to star in a new movie one that was made after his death. With the permission of his family, the filmmakers have brought back his voice and image using AI. As Turia Isri reports, some warn it's a grim omen for the future of filmmaking.
Don't fear the dead, and don't fear me.
In the new movie, As Deep as the Grave, the late Val Kilmer plays a priest and spiritual guide, a role only made possible by a digital resurrection. His performance was generated entirely by AI.
You're everyone's problem.
The real-life Kilmer was best known for 80s and 90s classics like Top Gun.
Darkness is as clear as daylight.
And Batman Forever. Kilmer was set to star in the upcoming Western, but had to step away when it started filming in 2020 because of his throat cancer.
I don't do this with every interview I go on.
His voice and image were recreated using archival footage and recordings.
He enthusiastically wanted to be a part of it. It was a character that really spoke to him.
The filmmakers are defending their decision to render his likeness with AI.
He conferred this blessing to his children to do exactly this. So we do believe that we're fitting the exact model to demonstrate to the world the right way to use AI in an ethical way.
It's not the first time Kilmer embraced the new technology.
One last thing. Who's the better pilot?
In 2022, filmmakers used AI to replicate his voice in the sequel to Top Gun.
In a lot of ways, this is sort of the coming tsunami.
Critics have called bringing stars back from the dead disrespectful and warn filmmaking is losing its humanity while pushing non-A-list actors out of work.
How are you going to break in and become the next big thing if the old big thing keeps generating revenue?
To some, it's a haunting sign of where the movie business is headed. Turia Isri, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Colleen Christie. Tonight's Your Canada is Dunham, Quebec. We love to see your Canada. Please email it to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again tomorrow. Good night.